I greatly appreciate the opportunity to contribute to this debate, and of course I wholeheartedly support this extremely important motion. And before I talk to the topic at hand, I would just state that I know this replaced statements post-European Council on the schedule, and I would ask, as I've already said to my own party's rep on the Business Committee beside me, that that is restored to a future schedule for the Dáil, because it is a requirement under the Lisbon Treaty in terms of subsidiarity that every European Council receives a report to our national parliament. And I think that's vitally important, because whilst Belarus was front and centre of this council, it wasn't the only issue, and there was much more to discuss, as I know Minister Byrne focused on in great detail. And before I start that, I'm very grateful to Minister Coveney for his detailed intervention and the strength of this motion, which really is very strong and very important. But I'd also like to make a personal commendation of Minister Byrne for the tireless effort he's made on this issue in particular. Throughout his time as a minister, he's gone above and beyond in terms of phone calls, in terms of meetings, in terms of corralling support within the European Union member states for what was a very important decision by the European Council last week. I won't lie, I was sceptical. I was concerned that the response from the European Council might have been slightly disappointing, particularly with the nature of some of the other governments' approach to dealing with Belarus and indeed Russia within the European Council. But to have a unanimous support for easily the strongest set of sanctions and condemnations on Belarus coming from the European Council is vitally important, and it's a huge testament to the Taoiseach, Minister Coveney and Minister Byrne for their tireless work with European colleagues. But I am absolutely struck, Las Cancorna, and I'm so disappointed that it's taken an act of international terrorism to unite the EU to actually do something genuinely forcible in relation to the situation in Belarus. The fact that an Irish-owned airliner was forced to land in Belarus in order that Roman Protasevich could be dragged off the plane by KGB agents with his girlfriend, and now languishes in a Belarusian jail facing potentially the death penalty. It's something out of the most bizarre and scary situation, but that's what it took for the European Union, for every single one of the 27 member states to finally stand up and offer genuine condemnation and sanction for the totalitarian regime in Belarus that many of us have been talking about and raising via parliamentary question and other post-European and pre-European Council statements in this chamber for quite some time. But this is nothing new. We are dealing with a brutal dictatorship that is a puppet of the Russian government, and we have to be firm, not just in this Parliament, the EU member state furthest away from Belarus, but across the European Union. Because Roman Protasevich is now just one of 421, at least, political prisoners languishing in a Belarusian jail. And I'm very fortunate, like many other members of this House, to have been asked by Liberco to adopt one political prisoner, Tatiana Yakovlevich, as she sits in a Belarusian prison since November. A 20-something-year-old student going about her business, concerned about the future of her country, arrested in the middle of the night, taken from her apartment, her mobile phone seized, her laptop seized, her iPad seized, and now she stands on trial in a collective trial. It's an absolute show trial. She's going to be found guilty. Lord knows what the regime is going to do to her and so many others. But this has been going on for a long time, and it's simply not good enough that we allow certain member states within the EU to block meaningful action. Because whilst the sanctions agreed by the European Council were extremely welcome last Cancorla, and this motion is particularly welcome put down by the government in this chamber today, and it is particularly strong, it's still not enough. We need to go further. We need to look at what other member states and former member states and non-member states of the European Union have done to provide a meaningful response to what's going on in Belarus and their attack on European sovereignty by forcing a European-owned, an EU-registered airliner travelling between two EU capital cities full of EU citizens to be brought down in the manner that it was, with a fighter plane and an illegal bomb threatened. And that's why we have to, Minister Las Cancorla, we have to at this stage call for the EU to make a full audit of every business active. Every business based in the EU, based in Ireland, Minister, who have connections or who are active in Belarus. A full audit, like has been called for in the House of Westminster, of all these companies. And we have to make it clear that doing business with the regime in Belarus is simply unacceptable. It cannot be stood for, and we cannot allow the citizens of Belarus and the citizens of the EU to be put at risk for economic gain or otherwise. And I call on you, Minister, today to make that very meaningful charge at your next meeting of the General Affairs Council. And we look further, indeed, also at an example, and I think this is something that could be extremely important, and I'm struck by the general universal tone of the debate here this evening, Lascan Corla, in the Chamber, where I haven't heard anyone say that they'll speak against this motion, vote against this motion, which is refreshing, and hopefully we can have more of this in the future, but I think this is a pretty black and white issue. There's no grey area here. But we have to look at what we as a country can do meaningfully, how we can separate the authoritarian, totalitarian dictatorship, the regime, the cronies that surround President Lukashenko from the innocent people in Belarus who are suffering. Because Ireland does have strong ties to Belarus, and we think of the work done over the years by people like Adi Roach, by former TD Noel Coonan, who worked with children from Belarus who were affected by the fallout from the Chernobyl disaster and many other things, to bring them to Ireland. And we are struck by that tie, that relationship. But one thing I would call on, Minister, something that we can do, and we follow the example of what the UK has done in terms of Hong Kong. The Irish government can offer any individual, non-regime individual, has the ability and opportunity and fortune to escape Belarus. The Irish government should offer them visas immediately. Offer them Irish visas to allow them to work, to travel, and the security of being within the European Union. That is in our gift. It is a generous, sensible approach, and it is something that we can do as a small EU member state. It's something that we can do to prove to the people of Belarus that we are on their side. That when we criticise Belarus, we criticise the murderous regime of President Lukashenko, not the innocent people who have to live under that barbaric regime. Beyond that, we have to put pressure, Lascan Corla, on the sporting organisations. Not exactly a rich history of ice hockey in this country, but the fact that the ice hockey championships are due to take place, under-19 championships are due to take place in Belarus in the coming months, needs to be raised, and we need, Minister, to make that pressure put that pressure on the other EU member states who do have proactive ice hockey teams, to ask them not to send their teams into this despotic regime to play and offer tacit agreement for what the regime is doing. And it also extends, more importantly, to football. And we know that there are many matches and tournaments scheduled in Belarus in the coming months and in the coming years. And we need to take a stand as a government, we need to take a stand as the European Union. And we have to remember, this regime was the one that denied COVID existed, didn't bring in any restrictions, forced its people to continue to work, forced its people, allowed the Belarusian Football League to continue as the virus ran like wildfire. But what's behind this regime? And this is something that's of serious concern for the entire European Union, the tacit and not so tacit support that this regime receives from the Russian Federation. And this is something that's increasingly concerning, and we have to be more outspoken in this chamber and at a European Union level about the influence of the Russian government directly and other sinister forces that surround the Russian government within our European Union, but also within our neighbourhood. They are supporting and propping up this regime. Only at the weekend we saw a lovely cuddle between Vladimir Putin and President Lukashenko. The desperate dictator going to Moscow to receive affirmation and guarantee of protection, funding, and so much else. It's pathetic, but that is what we're facing. We see the influence Russia's had in the affairs of Ukraine. We see the absolutely scandalous acts in the United Kingdom, in the city of Salisbury. You see the brazen attempts by Russian elements, government or non-government, to influence elections across the European Union. And let's not forget that this state expelled Russian diplomats only a couple of years ago in response to the vicious state-sponsored murder in Salisbury. We need to be quite clear that within the European Union, we will not tolerate these attempts to undermine our democratic institutions, our domestic security, and the viability of this country to act without fear of influence and malevolent forces. And we all know that so many regimes across the former Soviet bloc are prepared to tolerate and protect the sort of criminal gangs that were responsible for the vicious cyber attack that befell our HSE in the last couple of weeks. This is what we're dealing with. We're not talking about the situation in Belarus in isolation. We're talking about the genuine geopolitical stability of the entire region and the need for Ireland, as a member of the EU, as a member of the UN Security Council, to not just put down a motion like this, which is extremely welcome, to not just have a selection of strong speeches, but also to play our part on the global stage continuously. Because the 400-odd prisoners in Belarusian jails will still be there in a couple of weeks' time. The people who live in Belarus will still be suffering in a couple of weeks' time. We cannot let this debate be a one-time effort. And I absolutely appeal to you, Minister Ken Corla, to make sure that this motion is binding, is lasting, and that everything that is done at an EU level by any minister of this government continues to push the case for the ordinary people of Belarus and underlines the genuine concern that all of us have for security and stability across the European Union and how that is reflected by the dictatorship in Belarus.